Hello, I'm Adam Wren.
And I'm Megan Messerly. It's Tuesday, August 5th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. This morning, I have the pleasure of welcoming Politico White House reporter Megan Messerly back to the show.
It's so great to be here, Adam.
Thanks so much for joining us. And without further ado, here's what's driving the day. First up, the biggest story in Washington comes from everywhere but Washington. With Congress out of town on August recess, it's town hall season, and seemingly everywhere, members are encountering voters who are angry about all sorts of things. Last night in Nebraska, Republican Representative Mike Flood was bombarded with boos when the conversation turned to Medicaid and the Republican mega law. It was quite something to watch. I dialed in and I was shocked. The first 2 minutes and roughly 49 seconds were very civil. But then after that, it went a bit off the rails. And by about 6 minutes in, Flood was pleading with about 700 folks to just give him a chance to talk and explain his position on the mega law. And it was pretty remarkable. For the next 80 minutes, it really went off the rails and ended with the crowd essentially chanting, "Vote him out." So, Megan, I'm curious, what do you think the White House is thinking as they watch this town hall and the inevitable clips that we'll see on the morning shows in a few hours here?
Look, I don't think this sort of reaction was unexpected. I think the White House knew there were going to be some messaging challenges here. At the same time, I think they've been pretty firm in their belief that they can win this messaging war, despite the pushback that there's going to be in these town halls over, for instance, the Medicaid provisions in the bill, right? That could be a tough sell to some folks. But ultimately, I mean, they really believe they have the winning argument here, which is why we've seen them send out Vice President J.D. Vance out into the real world, into the states, to sell this bill to the American people. On the other hand, this town hall just shows the challenging task that's ahead of them in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think while it's always possible friends from the right could be taking a populist stance here, I think that in any town hall that features people chanting tax the rich, we can assume that maybe the audience is a little bit lopsided. The state Democratic Party there in Nebraska advertised that this town hall was happening, but still some arresting optics in midterms are all about turning out voters who are energized by their party and for their party. But still, I was struck to see the Epstein files brought up. Megan, it seems like interest has cooled a little bit. We're talking about Sydney Sweeney now. We're talking about redistricting. What do you make of how much heat that narrative still has right now?
It's really fascinating, to see that come up during that town hall. I mean, to your point, it just shows the saliency of this issue and the fact that when Republicans have been spending so long talking about this, talking about the files, talking about the need for transparency, despite the White House's best efforts to get folks to move on from this, there is staying power, right? You can't undo the work that has been done to stoke concerns within the MAGA base overnight, right? And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here. The fact that you have people pressing Representative Mike Flood on this and him having to defend himself and say, yeah, I'm going to push for transparency, just speaks to the fact that as much as other issues have come to the foreground, this is, to the chagrin of the White House, not going away anytime soon.
Well, the second big topic driving the day is the ongoing fallout from Texas Republicans' attempt to withdraw their congressional maps. Yesterday, the state legislature gavelled back into session even while dozens of its Democratic members were in Illinois, New York, and Massachusetts in an attempt to deprive the legislature of quorum, effectively grinding it to a halt. The Speaker of the House signed civil arrest warrants for the Democrats who fled the state, but they show no sign of returning anytime soon. Megan, all of this was caused by Donald Trump wanting Texas to withdraw their maps to give him some insulation from a potentially difficult midterms. He is well aware of the ghosts of 2018, how he lost the seats in the House then, and how that really opened him up to two impeachments. What do you think the White House makes of this moment? And are they willing to spend some political capital to really put pressure and bring Democrats back to Austin?
I think this is a really interesting situation because we have seen the White House and the president really keep their powder dry as we've had this escalating situation here. For as much as the sort of architects of this heading into the midterms, this has the potential to get really messy really fast with threats to arrest lawmakers upon them returning to the state. The Texas legislature has now made changes since the last time this happened. There's $500 a day fines. Then you get into the broader questions of talking about sending the Texas state troopers to arrest some of these folks. But do you try to use the National Guard to send folks into blue states where these, like, it just gets really difficult really fast. And I don't think the White House has any desire to get into that. Looking at the way that this has played out historically, it's usually just sort of a battle of wills, right? Where the lawmakers try to stick it out for a number of weeks. Eventually, someone breaks, they come home, and this moves forward. Texas Governor Greg Abbott can just keep calling the legislature back into special session. These lawmakers are going to have to come home at some point. So, these often become sort of a battle of wills. And that's sort of a much cleaner way to address this than getting into a really thorny constitutional crisis level situation, which could just get very complicated very fast.
Yeah, I've been fascinated to see the lack of sort of opining from President Trump's True Social account about the situation. If you're a Republican, whenever you can complain about Democrats not doing their job, that seems like a good base to start from, but we're not seeing that here. And as our colleague Jake Traylor, a White House reporter, found in his talking to an administration official about Texas, their view of this is that, quote, "we made our case and now we're counting on them to get it done." This person added that they are taking a hands-off approach on all of this. The Texas Democrats that I have been talking to have worried that the president could send in the National Guard. That doesn't appear to be in the offing at the moment. We'll see as this escalates whether or not that could happen. All of that brings us to our third and final item driving the day, California, where in response to Texas's GOP gerrymander, state Democratic leaders are moving to redraw maps in a way that would effectively oust a number of Republican incumbents and result in as many as 5 new blue seats. Under the proposal, Democrats would hold all but 4 of California's 52 congressional districts. Governor Gavin Newsom says he plans to call for a special election in November to get it done. Megan, this is your home state. You know California well. Are you surprised by what we're seeing happening there? Is this all about Newsom trying to wrest the 2028 spotlight back on him?
I'm not surprised by this. California has been this sort of incredible foil to President Trump in his first term, and we're seeing it again now. So, no, I'm not surprised that we're seeing this. California is sort of positioning itself as a counterweight here. It also just underscores how much state legislatures have sort of adopted the partisanship of Washington. Before I was at Politico, I was a humble legislative reporter in Nevada, right? And you have Republicans and Democrats working across the aisle, genuinely friends with one another. But that is becoming an increasingly rare phenomenon as we see Washington politics sort of seep back out to the states. And that to me seems like what we're seeing happen here is we see the Texas legislature on the one hand having this redistricting fight, California using its size and the potential impact of a mid-cycle redistricting there as a counterweight to that. So no, I'm not surprised, but I do think for sort of average American voters, this probably is much to their chagrin to see this kind of brinksmanship spill out into the rest of the country.
I will say, just between Newsom and J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, it's been fascinating the last few days to watch the 2028 subtext become sort of the main text. You had J.B. Pritzker with the Texas Democrats outside of Chicago, and he had his campaign signage just behind them. This really does seem like a 2028 play here. And Newsom is the same story. They're really sort of hijacking the news cycle as it unfolds and finding all sorts of ways to insert themselves. Do you think that that is going to be remembered by Democratic base voters in, say, January, February, March of 2028, or is this all going to be a distant memory by then?
I think it's hard when we live in the 24-hour news cycle where there's like 5 news cycles a day. So I'm inclined to say no, they're not going to remember that. But on the other hand, this is all an effort of boosting name recognition, right? Get their name out there, get them known. So even if voters aren't remembering the specifics of what J.B. Pritzker did or what Gavin Newsom did, the fact that they're hearing those names on the nightly news is not nothing. And so to me, that's the more salient point here, is that it's sort of raising their national profiles and to your point, in a way that's quite transparent about what's really going on here.
Well, it really is sort of a Pandora's box. And I gotta say, in January of this year, ahead of the 2026 midterms, I wouldn't have called, a spate of mid-cycle redistricting efforts to be the major storyline 15 months away from the midterms. So always a surprise.
Absolutely.
As always, we try to end the show with something from the Playbook newsletter. Our colleague scooped that Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is expected to announce later this week plans to build a nuclear reactor on the moon. I had to read that a couple of times before we started just to make sure that that was accurate, but that is indeed the latest development. The announcement will be Duffy's first major action as the interim NASA administrator. The moon nuclear reactor would, on this expedited schedule, launch by 2030, which is the same year that officials hope to put a new space station in space. Megan, quite the development here.
It really is. I mean, I'm a big sci-fi nerd. I'm a big Star Trek nerd. This feels like something straight out of some sort of sci-fi movie, but will be fascinating to see where this goes from here.
And I definitely don't want to miss a thing to play on another popular Hollywood movie that involves a nuclear weapon in space. Send us your tips, birthdays, or spotted moments to Playbook at politico.com. Megan, thanks as always.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
And that's all for today's show, but we have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great Tuesday.